Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is going to be an absolutely fantastic session diving deep into the realities of technology and humanity in the future of customer contact. Now, I'm pretty confident, but the time calls for it, I can definitely be humble. I can definitely acknowledge when I might have made a mistake. And throughout this campaign, both the research report for the market study as well as for the seminar series, we've used the branding technology versus humanity. We've really pit these two concepts together, falling into the same trap that we often have with concepts like efficiency versus personalization and customer centricity versus business centricity. We always take these concepts and we act like they're oppositional, that they're different, that they're working against each other. Well, when it comes to technology and humanity, that is not the case. As we look at the future of AI, the future of human ingenuity, the future of engaging with customers, we know that they must be working in tandem. They must be balanced. We must be optimizing both to ensure that customers walk away with the ideal experience, the ideal belief in our brand, to ensure that employees walk away confident that they're advocating for an organization that cares about its customers and delivers stellar experiences. In this session, we're going to walk through the future of agentic enterprises and why they don't force you to choose between one or the other, but instead allow you to enjoy the positive results of both. And I'm not going to be getting through this conversation alone. I'm thrilled to be welcoming Chris Arnold here from ASAPP. ASAPP has been an absolute innovator in this space, and Chris is one of the true brains and thought leaders behind such a great organization. So, Chris, I want to give you a chance to start off by telling us about yourself, about the organization, and maybe what makes you different as you think about this tech and humanity balance.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. First of all, thank you for allowing me to join the conversation. It's an honor to be here. And maybe for those in the audience that are not as familiar with ASAP as they need to be, since we'll be talking a good bit about that today, I want to first explain, ASAP delivers the enterprise customer experience platform for the agentic era that you're just talking about. And it's built on a foundation of generative agent. CXP actually resolves complex customer needs, connects data across all of these disparate systems that exist in the enterprise today, and really tailors every interaction to the individual customer. Enterprises today are already using ASAP to reduce cost, accelerate resolution, and build a future-ready foundation where every customer will one day have their very own AI agent. My role at ASAP is probably most easily described as a customer success role. Other than having great conversations like this, I spend the vast majority of my time working with existing customers and prospective customers, really helping them get started on their AI, their generative AI journey. Usually that comes in the form of journey mapping for their existing customer flows. We spend a good bit of time curating data sources and really making sure uh, everything that will be required for AI to be successful on the front end is available on the back end. And it's what I refer to as a go slow to go fast approach. And I'm seeing enterprises really rally around generative AI and the notion of starting slow with a couple of more basic intents and then building on that and sort of creating that flywheel effect. That's really where I spend most of my time today.
Yeah, and again, I think that vision that you and the team have for what the future of customer interactions needs to look like, that it's not let's think of a shortcut to getting where we are now, but instead let's look at how all this innovation, how all this customer centric thinking is coming together to elevate us and add value and make customers more trusting, make experiences better and more rewarding. That is the mindset that we need to see in the innovation space. That's the mindset that should be driving the development of AI. So thrilled to dive in. So I want to, as a reminder, I have some questions planned, but we're live here, so feel free to ask any questions you want of either me or Chris. We'll get to what we can, and certainly we also have people in the chat here to follow up with if we're in the middle of a talking spree and can't get to it. But we're really thrilled to be welcoming you. So one thing I definitely want to mention here right off the bat is what I alluded to is that we often put technology versus humanity. That was the theme of the market study, which is available that you contributed to. That is the theme of the seminar series. However, the reality is the right organization is really looking at a way to balance tech-driven innovation and human-centered support. So what does that balance mean to you? How are you thinking about that moving forward?
I go back to my 20 years as a practitioner, having worked for a large telco for those 2 decades and actually having started out as an agent on the phones and having done just about every job in not only the contact center, but more broadly the CX journey, which includes all things digital. And you're exactly right. I appreciate you calling out that little nuance of versus, because when I look back across my, quarter of a century of time in this space, I see a lot of binary approaches. Our mindset has historically been voice versus digital, automation versus agent. And you mentioned it in the beginning, it's cost versus satisfaction. And what I'm seeing is these generative solutions now are actually enabling us to achieve both outcomes. From voice versus digital, it's now voice and digital. For 2 decades, we've been trying to deflect voice calls into digital channels because they're lower cost. We've built websites, mobile apps, IVRs for self-service capabilities. In and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with those technologies, but we over-rotate and we push things into other channels that can't be properly served there. And the consumer is the one that pays the price for that. And the business does not receive the ROI that they thought they were going to. And so now we finally reach a level of technology that can accomplish all of these ends that we've been trying to achieve for 2 decades.
Now, we've spent the first part of this conversation sort of ridiculing a common buzzword or phrase out there of tech versus humanity, but I don't want to leave our audience with just another buzzword. I don't just want to say, okay, instead of putting them against each other, let's balance them. I think we need to be more precise when we're defining what exactly is AI going to solve as it relates to the current customer experience, current challenges, and what is that going to mean specifically for the way humans are involved in this experience? So I know that's going to form a lot of the conversation here, but just to start off, what do you see as AI's biggest impact on workflow within customer experience organizations?
Yeah, if you think about workflow and the work that human agents have done since the beginning of time, there are massive amounts of minutes of work. The vast majority of those minutes of work are conversations while transactions and tasks and workflows are being handled in parallel, simultaneously, often a distraction to the customer. And so what I see now is with generative AI being able to handle virtually 100% of the dialogue with the customer themselves, you now have a human agent that can observe these conversations and can serve a critical role. What we've read is, what humans do best. Think of empathy, critical thinking, decision making, handling these more complex and emotive interactions. We're actually elevating the importance of the human by shifting the AI to do what it does best, which is transact, while allowing the human to supervise and then sort of unstick where legacy technologies, the bots would have gotten stuck and had to escalate to a human, and the human has to fully take over. Now there's a role reversal where now the human agent is supervising the AI, allowing it to do what it does best while allowing the human to do what we do best. And I think this is true across voice, it's true across digital. And so for the first time, the other most critical humans in this are the consumers interacting with the businesses. And now across all of these different entry points, whether it's voice or digital, websites, mobile apps, IVRs, you can now stitch all of this together for the first time. And you spoke buzzwords, we've been talking about omni-channel for a very long time. With this sort of wrapper, what we call our platform, you can now finally bring all of these systems together, these entry points for customers, creating a seamless, very personalized experience, which has been a pipe dream for a long time, but I think we're really on the cusp of achieving some of those things.
Yeah, and I think you really hit on two important takeaways from my perspective. One is that when we talk about, cliches of AI for simple issues, humans for complex ones, we forget that the reality is that even with simple issues, because so many processes are broken, because human agents are spending their time in the wrong place, because they're not getting the data, the insights, the support they need, because they're so overwhelmed by all these inefficiencies, they're not even great right now in many cases at the simple issues. And then we're saying we're going to get rid of all those, throw only the hardest stuff at you. without making any changes, we're really setting them up for failure. So we present this as an agent experience play, but if we don't address what's been bottlenecking their work and creating frustration, then it's not going to be an agent experience play. It's only going to create more frustration. The other thing is that reality that we have to be very clear on what AI can actually do. The truth is, with where the technology is right now, it, to your point, is very capable of frontline conversation. And if we ignore that, or if we stunt the growth of the technology by saying it's really just a back office secretary for agents and that's all it can do, we're not going to really, I think, maximize the efficiency of our operation. We're not going to bring personalization to customers. We're not going to truly balance that workflow. So again, it's really first understanding if we want human agents to do everything they can do well, what's standing in their way? And secondly, if we want AI to be worth the investment and worth the while, what psychologically and strategically is standing in the way of making that happen? And I think the balance you're talking about really works for that. The other thing I really like here is that from our market study, we identified some of the areas where organizations feel humans are irrefutably better than AI. And certainly empathy was part of it. Real time critical thinking, off script decision making, that was an area. And then also understanding the urgency of a situation. And so I like that idea of putting agents in position where they can use those skills to actually advise decisions, to actually oversee AI instances, to actually ensure that customers are not just getting a transactional answer that has nothing to do with what they're going through at that moment, but instead is very tied to the urgency of their situation, the context, the emotion they're showing. When you can do that, you can always ensure that no matter where the customer is interacting, no matter why they're interacting, and no matter what their expectation is, you're putting your business in best position to deliver. Doesn't mean every answer is always going to be yes. Doesn't mean you're going to have a 100% customer satisfaction score, but it means that you're giving yourself the best possible chance to be what that customer needs at that moment. And so I think that's a really great framework to add. Now, I want to dive into a little bit more about the new agent role. So one of the ways that we've described it as moving the agent from a task completer or a task doer to an AI supervisor and designer. And so, right now, in order for that to happen, we don't just have to have the vision. We also have to get away from what's standing in the way of this transition. So, what do you look at as the journey for how AI can make this a reality where agents are actually able to devote more focus and more time to what you see as the ideal role for them?
Yeah, and I think it really begins with the right AI solution and right AI partner, because as an operator, you're running a business that doesn't allow you to become an expert on all things AI. Even for me, the world of AI is moving faster than any other technology I've ever seen. And so you need the technology that really enables all the things that I'm talking about, which is this sort of orchestration of massive amounts of data, which is going to come by way of APIs. Sometimes there's not APIs there. Sometimes there's knowledge bases and FAQs. There's different sources of data. You need a partner that can help inventory that. And this is where anchoring those data sources to the customer journey. And I'm not talking about the happy path customer journey. I'm talking about the real world experience your customers are experiencing every single day, understanding all of that, and then really having an AI platform, we call it CXP, that will integrate with the technology you've already invested in. It might be a CRM. So in the case of human in the loop, you need to show up where agents are already working today. So you may have a CRM that's, one of the more popular ones that's out there, or you may have a homegrown. You need a partner that has a technology that can surface these human in the loop interactions where the reviews and the approvals take place in a system that already exists. You don't need to keep adding more and more and more duplicative. That just adds to the friction, fragmentation, and the complexity of the agent experience. But we've talked a lot about the human agent on the front line. They're critical, of course. But I think there's also going to be a pretty massive evolution of what we have historically called an operations team or a back office team. Think about most enterprises have quality analysts, that are listening to calls. Perhaps they listen to 1 or 2% of calls. It is a very slow and rather ineffective process that's been around since I was on the phones. Well, now these QA analysts, because nobody understands the business, nobody understands the brand language better than these QA analysts, who better to help build out these generative AI flows run simulations in the background to make sure that they're producing the outputs, the outcomes that you really want your customers to experience. And then you have your human agents who also, we underestimate how much they know about the business. For every product and service that a company sells, nobody knows those breakpoints better than those frontline agents. And so allow them to supervise the AI, be there in those moments that matter, where maybe things get emotive, or maybe things are just too complex, or maybe there's a policy decision that needs to be made. This is where they can step in. And so instead of 10 or 15 minutes of average handle time, it's 15 to 20 seconds of key decision making and then sending the AI agent back to finish the conversation with the customer. And so it's not just the frontline agent that's going to evolve. It is a lot of the back office, and any human that's involved anywhere in the CX journey has an opportunity to use these AI solutions to really create pretty transformational outcomes.
Yeah, and I think when you think about an organization, the very fact that you had to clarify the different departments or types of employees you're talking about, that speaks to how fragmented we are right now. It speaks to the fact that we have all this knowledge about the right brand messaging, what customers want, what a good interaction looks like, and it's all very tribalized and siloed based on your current job title because you have the frontline agent, and then you have the QA team, and then you have the CRM analyst, and then you have the business intelligence team. When in reality, let's pool all this human ingenuity together. Let's use AI as kind of the way to kind of unify everything, and then ensure that when an interaction is taking place, all the combination of efficiency, of recognition, of consistency can be delivered on the front lines. And then all the human ingenuity can come together behind the scenes to really fuel the right decisions, the right level of empathy, the right roadmap, and the right understanding of what we can do better in the future. So I think that's really important. Another really important thing to bring up here is that we've shared surveys. I'm sure you've seen surveys. I'm sure most of our audience has seen, cliches mocking the idea of how self-service isn't always as effective as it can be, that people are screaming for that representative, screaming for that agent. You might think, okay, well, why are we then having a conversation about making AI even more central to the front line if there is resistance? Well, here is why. When we actually dive deeper into the data, we find that the majority of customers say that they want to self-serve even for complex issues. So it's not just the forgotten password, it's for real issues. They don't want to wait on hold. They don't want to be restricted by business hours. They don't want to have to repeat everything that they already shared to a live agent. They do so because at the end of the day, thus far, self-service has not been human enough. It has not been empathetic enough. It has not offered what humans represent. And so they feel, okay, let me escalate. If we can allow the efficiency of an AI-based experience, but ensure that the customer doesn't lose access to that off-script decision making, doesn't lose access to that human touch behind the scenes, doesn't lose access to that empathy, suddenly you truly have a best of both worlds. The consumer and the business benefit from the convenience, but they also know that response quality does not go down, emotional connection does not go down, personalization does not go down. And that's, I think, Chris, what we're talking about when we say it's not about opposition here, it's about a strong balance.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the one thing I'll add, because 100% right. Um, we've been training human agents, in new hire classes, classrooms since the beginning of time. Well, in a similar way, we're training these AI agents and we're training them on exactly what to say and how to say it. And it's amazing to listen to them do their thing with the proper prompting, the proper engineering, because they are probably even more capable of maintaining brand, but also even repairing brand when properly trained, when properly ran through simulations, the QA analysts I was talking about before, more than capable of showing up super consistently at a high level. Think of it as your best agent being multiplied, so no more trying to staff to these super high peaks in volume. Now your AI agent can scale, as your best agent performing at that really high level, without you having to staff to it, which we know is, not really feasible. And so now we're at this inflection point where we can start to address these sort of systemic issues that have existed in the context of like absenteeism, attrition, constantly having to run human agents through new hire classes only to see them leave in 6 months. And it's finally time for us to be able to train these AI agents to do what those best agents already do.
Yeah, I think, and that makes sense. Now, again, this makes sense at a theoretical level. It makes sense at a technology level. I think we know, we're seeing a front row seat to how much this technology has evolved. And we, of course, know anyone on this call is some combination of a tech expert or a people expert from the role that they play within their organization. They also know everything you just said, that there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of redundancy that sort of makes the employee disengage. And then what happens is that very person that is playing such a huge role in driving customer satisfaction, they're not sticking around long enough to know how to do it. Or if they are sticking around, they're overwhelmed, they're distracted, they're frustrated, and it leads to, a negative interaction for the customers. So we know what's been wrong so far, and we know why we want to fix it. But as we move to the final phase of this discussion, there's a difference between sort of theoretically understanding, okay, AI should play a bigger role and then humans can play a more of a supportive role. That makes sense as a theoretical track, but we also want to tie it to real outcomes. So from your perspective, from what you've seen working with clients, from what you know of where this general landscape is going, what do you see as the value for the customer experience if we approach the balance the way you're recommending here?
Yeah, I think for the first time in my career, this is as close to a sort of what I would call a silver bullet as I've ever seen, in that we can do all the things I've already mentioned of scaling an army of generative AI agents to say and do all the things we want them to do with the proper lead-in work, which is the mapping of the customer journey, the understanding of the data sources, some of the curation of new data sources, sometimes bringing all of that data together. There's work that's required. But for the first time, we can finally scale to address those weird peaks in volume that customers really would bear the brunt of that in the past. We can now have 24 by 7, 365 support. We can stitch all of this together, whether the customer chooses to engage with you first on the website, the mobile app, all the channels that we know exist today, that, by the way, are all fragmented. We can finally have a layer of intelligence. And that's the way I think about this CXP, the customer experience platform. It is not a bolt-on. CCaaSs have historically just added more and more capabilities to try to sort of be all things to all people. And in a lot of ways have become sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. You have conversational AI solutions that are very good at having a conversation, but not good at completing tasks in a way that achieves first contact resolution. CXP is a platform that actually focuses on acting and resolving. So the measure that I see moving the needle the most is first contact resolution. Automation in the past, virtual assistants and whatnot have focused on containment. And historically, it's been a very limited view because we didn't see that the customer fell out of the website and went to the phone. They chatted in, but didn't get what they needed, so they called the voice channel. And it sort of explains why we haven't seen operating costs come down in the contact center. It's because they're just channel hopping. And so for the first time, generative AI can seamlessly stitch all these channels together, can handle the vast majority of the minutes of work that historically human agents have had to conduct the entire conversation. And now human agents actually get what they want. They want to be empowered to supervise and help make decisions for the technology. And so I think it's time for us to sort of change the narrative. So instead of it being tech versus humanity, leaders in this space should be talking about not eliminating jobs, but talk about elevating jobs. Everybody needs to understand how AI is a critical tool in the role that they play. Now, will there 3 years from now be fewer human agents on the front line? I 100% believe that. But I think many new jobs will be created, some of which we talked about, the QA analyst. And so overall, the consumer wins because the people in the contact centers are winning for the first time. A lot of people are going to be able to evolve the work they do, which has been a long time coming. And I think those customers will reap the benefits because they will achieve more first contact resolution. They'll have the sort of choice, convenience, and control that comes with bringing all these channels together. And it'll be a much more personalized experience, a personalized experience that goes well beyond, oh, we knew your name and we appreciate your 5 years of service. No, it will be personalization is what it will feel like to the customer. But to us operators, it needs to be an individualized understanding of the historical context, This is the seventh time you've called. I noticed that you've been on the website. I noticed you abandoned your cart. It's finally stitching all of this together so that you can really create an individualized, very contextual experience using a generative AI solution.
Yeah, it's what we call productive or sort of productive or powerful personalization that you're really looking at how to make it add value for the customer, not showing off all the stuff you know about them. Customers know that you have an endless amount of data about them in today's era. What they care about is how you're using that data to add value. And what they don't want to know is, hey, thanks for being a VIP customer. Here's a very un-VIP experience. No, they want to know, okay, they know all this. Why do I have to go through this extra friction? Why do I have to repeat what I'm looking for? Why do I have to get promotions for the wrong type of product? In an era where you have everything unified, where you have everything working proactively, you can start to deliver that really individualized experience that adds value for the customer. Now, final question I have here, because over the course of this discussion, we have talked a lot about the friction that exists right now, the siloed departments, the disconnected systems. And I could imagine some people out there are saying, hey, I'm in that boat. Our research confirms that many people are in that boat. How do I get started? Is it worth my time to get started? What should I be doing? And so, any advice for those who maybe aren't quite mature in terms of connecting everything, but certainly want to get to the caliber of experience that you've been talking about so far?
Yeah, for sure. I'm quite convinced that every boardroom in this country has been talking about AI for the last 2 years, many of which do not have sort of a codified strategy. And I don't, it's not lost on me why this is true because there's a ton of noise out in the market. It's changing so rapidly, it's hard to really get your footing. The enterprises that I see moving furthest, fastest are those that from the C-suite have established a very clear message to say, we are going to leverage AI for the betterment of our customers, for the betterment of our employees, to drive shareholder value. And it comes from the C-suite. Either the chief executive officer or the chief customer officer will typically say, this is a critical tool to have in our tool belt to provide us a competitive advantage for the foreseeable future. And out of this is typically born an AI governance board that addresses all of the silos that we've been talking about over this entire conversation. Finally, the contact center, marketing, the digital teams, the sales teams, all of these groups who have historically operated in silos are now coming together to have one cohesive strategy. And it kind of goes back to what I said before about go slow to go fast. These things take time, but it is a way to really grease the tracks to accelerate this flywheel that will ultimately lead to transformational outcomes as more and more of your interactions get fed through this single CXP, single platform. It'll completely transform the customer experience, but it's going to require us to eliminate the silos by bringing all of these different business units to the table. Otherwise, every one of those business units will deploy their own AI solution, and it will just be a modern version of the problem that we've been trying to address for 2 decades, which is the friction and fragmentation. So the short answer is we need to have executive level support from the C-suite. We need to have an AI governance board that acknowledges and takes action to prevent this friction and fragmentation. There should be one AI brain, one AI solution that ultimately serves the needs of the customer. It's not about just taking cost out of the business. It's not just about driving clicks on websites or close rates for sales teams. It's about creating an amazing customer experience that exceeds anything not only your competitors are offering, but all the companies that we choose to do business with. The goalposts have moved from a customer experience perspective. The expectation is that you be the best customer experience of all the companies I choose to do business with, not just my competitors. And so I think this is what this will enable, but it does require you to do some work on the front end, whether it's the AI governance board, curation of data sources, mapping out customer journeys, and then don't be afraid to start small. Start small and allow that flywheel to do what it does and build, learn, and iterate on top of that. And a year from now, you'll be in an incredibly different place than you are today.
Yeah, well, that does bring us to the end of the session, Chris. I want to thank you and the ASAP team so much for not only this session, but just generally your refreshing perspective on the AI human balance. As sort of a recap of takeaways, one, make sure that you have the entire organization on board, starting with your executive team. You really have to commit to using AI as a vehicle for value, as a vehicle for better experience, as a vehicle for better connections. From there, it's about recognizing that technology and humanity are not working in opposition. They're working collaboratively and they can work together to generate that value. At that point, you want to really rank and look at what are the things that technology does really, really well? What are the things humans do really, really well? And ensure you're building workflow in that dynamic. Per Chris's recommendation, that's often going to mean a lot of frontline talking and conversations is handled by AI, but the empathy, the decision making, the critical engine behind everything, that's really sitting with humans. And then finally, redefining the roles, redefining the metrics based on this new normal. So looking at what does the future customer contact employee need to know? What skills do they need to have? How are they measured? And then how are you holding yourselves accountable, not just for more containment or more utilization, but more satisfaction, more loyalty, more personalization, things that actually move the needle in relationships, things that build that human connection. Again, for more, you can definitely check out ASAPP. I know there's a link to see a demo as well, so make sure to book that. And of course, check out the market study, which features some amazing research as well as amazing contributions from the ASAPP team. Anything you want to say, Chris, as we wrap up here?
I just want to say, don't be afraid to get started. You don't want to be sitting on the sidelines because this will be a defining moment in our careers. And Brian, I appreciate your thoughts, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Definitely. Thanks so much to everyone, and thanks to you for continuing to be part of this final seminar series of 2025.